Hey everyone, Sergey here from ukramedia.com, and in this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to create this 3D logo transition done entirely in Blender. That's right, we're going to do things like modeling, texturing, lighting, animation, and compositing, all of that in Blender. If you don't know what Blender is, essentially it's a free 3D software that is super awesome. I mean, Cycles is a great engine, but we're going to use a render engine called Eevee. It's a gaming engine, it's a real-time engine, but it's super fast and it's perfect for motion graphics. So without any further ado, let's dive right in. All right, so we are in Blender 2.8 beta, which is awesome. It's looking great. I love it. The UI, everything's just looking phenomenal. Good job, Blender. You guys just did an amazing job. So let's get to it. Let's bring in our vector graphics. So that's what Blender looks like when you first fire it up. Let's get rid of this cube, hit X, get rid of it. Let's bring in our vector graphic. I'm gonna go to File, Import, and Scalable Vector Graphics, SVG. So if you are in Illustrator, make sure you export it as SVG file, all right? So let's get to my file. Here it is. I'm going to import it. And as you can see, it is here in our composition, or in our scene, and it's so small you can't even see it. I mean, it's really, really small, like right there. So what we need to do, we need to get in here, and let me change the texture real quick to something more white. And by the way, I'm gonna be kind of going fast. So here's our logo, and we have it in here. So let me kind of show you what I have. So first one I have it is a circle. There it is. Let me label this circle. All right, then we have this edge. So you can see it's like just a stroke, right? So I'm gonna call this one circle stroke. All right, then we have this UM. Let me rename this to UM. And then last one we have, let me hide all of these. We have this UM stroke. All right, let's rename this to UM stroke. All right, so we have all of them in here. It's kind of tiny. I'm gonna select all of them. You can just do it like this, or you can hold down Shift and just select all of them. However you get there, that's fine. I have all of them selected, then press Tab on your keyboard to go into edit mode. So I have all of my, I guess, vertices in here. So I'm gonna press A to select all of them. So I want all of them together. And what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna scale it. So I'm gonna hit 7 to go to top view. And I'm gonna press S to scale like this. By the way, I use shortcuts for scaling and moving around, but you'll see it in here. Here's the move tool, here's the scale tool. It's the same concept, but I just like to use a shortcut. All right, so something like that might work. As you can see, I'm gonna press G and move it around. So let's hit Tab again to get out of edit mode. And as you can see, there it is in our scene. But the problem is our anchor point, or I'm not sure what you would call it in Blender, but essentially our pivot point is in here. And I want the pivot point to be in the center of our shapes. For example, if I select this stroke right here, or maybe like circle stroke, right? And if I press R for rotation, you can see it's rotating based on this anchor point or pivot point, okay? Well, I want it to be in the center of my shape. So I'm gonna select all of them, and I'm going to center, in other words, put the pivot point for each shape or each object in the center of it. Let me show you how to do that. So make sure you select all of them, go to Object, and then in here where it says Set Origin, click on this Origin to Center of Mass. Click on that, and as you can see, it kind of went in there. So each object has its own pivot point in the center of it. So that's good. That's exactly what I want. And now if I select this and press R, you know, it's rotating, but you can't see it because the anchor point is in the center. So that's good. What I want to do now, I want for everything to be parented to this edge, the stroke, right? So what I'm going to do, I'm going to select everything except the stroke. So whatever you select last will become the parent for whatever you have selected. So I'm going to select the circle stroke last, and then press Control P. And right here it says Set Parent to, I'm going to say Object. And what happens, as you can see here visually, it dropped everything under the circle stroke. So now when I select the circle stroke, and if I press G, you can see it moves everything, which is exactly what I want. Now, I want to put this in the center of my scene. How would I do that? Now, you can use a shortcut. I believe it's Alt-G, so you can get there that way. Or you can just go, make sure you select it and go to Object. And then right here where it says Clear, just say Location, Alt-G, and then it's going to clear that for you. That's exactly what I want. So now we have arrived there. Obviously in Cinema 4D, which is my background, it's much easier to set this stuff up, but you can still do this in Blender. So let's do some extrusions. So let's extrude these things. Next, let's start with the inside. We're gonna go with the stroke first. So the edge, that's gonna be like the chrome. All right, so we're gonna go to data, object data, and in here you have resolution. So you can see it's not very detailed, but if you crank up on that, it gets more smooth. So I'm gonna take it up to 30. But it might be a bit much, you know, for preview and render, it might be a bit much, but that's what I'm gonna go with. Geometry, let's do some extrude. So let's do 0.1. It's looking good. Now, I'm gonna do bevel later, so I'm just gonna do extrude for right now. Okay, let's do the same thing for So now we have this By the way, if you do control, was it shift, enter, or space? Yeah, there you go. Move, it's the same thing as clicking on these. So you can move it around like that. So that's what we're gonna extrude next. And again, let's go to object data. Let's crank up the resolution. And let's go to geometry. In here, let's extrude it 0.1. All right, so we have it in there, that's good. And what I wanna do, I wanna move both of these up, but we'll do that here in a second. So let's do the same thing for this circle. And I'm gonna select the circle. Let's do object data. And in here, we're gonna crank it up 30 and 30. And geometry, let's do extrude 0.1. So all this stuff is kind of boring, but you gotta do this. Okay, the same thing for edge here. So select, go to object data. Let's crank this up to 30. Geometry 0.1. All right, so all of them are extruded. Okay, and let's move up on these. So I'm gonna select and stroke. So I wanna move this up some. So I'm gonna say, let's do this. So as you move, you'll see this right here. So this is where you can keep altering. So you can say, hey, let's do 0.1. So something like that is good. So anytime you do kind of movement or scale, you'll see options in here, which is nice. It kind of pops up for you. You can alter it. You can say, you know, global, local, any of that, which is great. I mean, I love what they've done here. It's just phenomenal. Anyway, so now we have it kind of laid out how we want it. Now let's do some beveling. And let's start with this, the edge first, the stroke for this So let's go to object data, and bevel is in here. So let's resolution, let's keep it at 5. And for depth, let's go like 0.01. That might be good. Let's see what 0.005. That might be even better. So something like that is good. And let's select the inside and do the same thing. We're gonna go to bevel. Let's go to 5 here, and let's do like 0.02. That might be a bit much, but essentially what you wanna do, you don't want it to be flat. So I wanna add some edging around like each shape to kind of add some more detail. So that's what I'm doing here. And obviously when you do bevel, it kind of just pushes your, you know, it adds onto your shape, and you don't want to do that. So you want to kind of offset this a bit. So you can play with offset, and let's go hit 7 on numpad, and you can go to top view. So in here, I can adjust my offset here. So I can move it around and be like, all right, let's see what looks good here. It's probably a bit too much. Let's go like 0.1 maybe. No, that's not good. 0.01 or negative, sorry, negative 0.01. Let's do negative 0.02. That actually works. All right, that's good. And as you can see, now it adds some shape to our geometry here. I mean, it adds some beveling. It looks nice. I like it. So it looks like, you know, it's not flat. So that's good. So we have that one finished up. Let's do the same thing for the circle. I'm going to select the inside of the circle first. Let me move that so you can see that's what I'm dealing with here. Let's go to object data, and in here at the bevel here, let's take it up to 5, and let's go with something like 0.2 as well. Yeah, you can see it's pretty extreme. That might be a bit too much. Let's go 0.02. Yeah, that's much better. And then we can do offset again. And we'll play with offset a bit more because we need to do this one as well. So let's do bevel on that one, take it up. Let's go 0.02, or actually 0.01. Yeah, that's good. Again, I like the bevel. It kind of adds like the hot spots on your shape. It kind of, you know, gives a little gradient at the bottom, so that's nice. So let's adjust the inner circle. I'm gonna go 7 on numpad to kind of see from the top view, and let's offset this. That might be actually good. So let's go over here, offset, let's do negative 0.02. Okay, let's do negative 0.03. I think that will work. So something like that is good. All right, essentially, that's what we have here. It's not bad. It's looking pretty good, actually. So what I'm going to do, I need the back as well. So the back is actually, I need to have 2 shapes because I'm going to use it for a mat. So I'm going to select the circle, the inside of the circle, and I'm going to adjust the extrusion. So let's go over here and let's take it to just half of it. Instead of 0.1, we're going to do 0.05. Okay, so that's good. And then let's move it up on, what is it, Z-axis, right? So on Z, we're going to move it up. Let's do it to 0.05. All right, so we have it in there. And now we have more of a gap in the back. But what I want to do, I'm going to select this shape, the circle one that we have right now, and I'm going to press Shift D and duplicate it. And then right away, you can see when we duplicate it, we have duplication, like duplicate objects options that we can work with. I can move it on Z. I can say, hey, let's go in the opposite direction, negative 0.05. No, let's do this, negative 0.1. There you go. That's what I wanted. So this one, I don't want any bevel. So I'm going to get rid of the bevel and let's take it down to 0 here. Offset, we don't need. So it's just flat. Essentially, it's going to be my mat in the back. So we're going to be using it for alpha. It'll make more sense as we go forward. All right, so we're almost there. I mean, geometry-wise, we got it down. I mean, it's looking great. It's exactly what I want, but let's add some more controls. Since we have our, like the outside ring here, since it's like the parent of everything else, I can select it and then press R and rotate it. You can say X and it's gonna go on the X axis. And then you can press 90 and it's going to go 90 degrees. Essentially, it's the same thing, like going to object here and doing it there, or even selecting like this and moving it like that. So in Blender, you have many different options, which I love, which is great. So now we have it in the proper place. That's good. And let's add a null. So a lot of times, well, in After Effects, we call it a null, but in Blender, I think they call it empty, which is the same concept. Essentially, it's just a control that we can see in Blender inside while we animate things, but in the final render, it will not be seen. So it's something that we create for ourselves. So let's bring that in. I'm going to press Shift A, or you can go to Add, either way. So by the way, it's going to put it wherever that 3D, what is it called? 3D cursor, that's what it's called. Again, I'm pretty new to the Blender world. I don't use it every single day, so I'm still getting adjusted to this. By the way, if I'm doing something wrong, let me know in the comment below. I would like to learn the proper way of doing things. All right, so again, it's gonna put things wherever your cursor is at. All right, so I'm gonna press Shift A, and then let's go to empty, this thing right here. Essentially, it's a null, and I'm gonna select this arrows. So there it is. I can go into here, or yeah, scroll up, and then we can adjust the size of it. So that's cool. It tells me which way is up, which way is, Z, just like it is X, which is nice. Let me go a little bit, yeah, something like that. So now that I have it in here, I'm going to label it controls, or controls, whatever you want to call it. And then I'm going to click and drop it into this collection for Ukramedia logo. So this logo right here that we're in. And next, what I want to do, I actually want for this controls empty to be the parent of my logo. And the reason why I do that, like at Fox Sports or anywhere that, I used to work at Fox Sports and we used to do logo transitions all the time. And you don't want to animate the logo itself because, there are times when you have to bring in other logos, other teams, and it becomes a very painful process. So this way you can just get rid of the old logo and bring in the new logo and parent it to the null or to the empty, just like it is in Blender. And then animation, everything stays the same. You don't have to redo anything. So that's nice. So it's a good practice to keep things, to animate the null and not the shape itself. So that's what I want to do. So what I'm going to do first, I'm going to select the circle, this logo, and then Shift select controls. So whatever I select last, that's going to become my parent. So I'm going to press Control P to parent it, and then Object. So now, as you can see, everything was dropped under the controls empty, which is good. So now I can select the empty and I can press G and move it around, and it's doing exactly what I wanted to do. So really, that's the end of setting up the logo. But there's one more thing I want to do before we move into texture. So I have this camera in here, and I'm going to go to Object here. Well, you can zero things out in here, or again, you can go to Object, go to Clear, Location, and it's going to drop it in the center. You know, it put everything 0 right here. The same thing for rotation. You can go to Object, and then Clear, and then Rotation. Remember, Alt-G or Alt-R. And as you can see, it clears everything, which is great. Now, I want to see what the camera is doing as far as like where it's looking at. But before I do that, let me rotate it on this here. So let's do 90. And let's go over here to Move Tool, and let's move it. So I am moving it. And by the way, let's do one more thing. Let's set it up to 24 millimeters. All right, so we got it in here, but I want to see again what we're looking at here. So I'm going to go over here to the top left corner and click and drag and open up a new window in here, which is awesome. I love this feature. And in here, I'm going to press 0 to see what camera is doing. So 0 on the numpad, make sure it's on the numpad. And in here, that's what we're seeing. So if I move on the camera, you can see that's exactly what we're seeing. So I'm going to place it about here. Let's see, -3. No, that's too much. All right, something like that is good. All right, it is time to do some lighting and texturing, and we're going to use a render engine called Eevee. It's a game engine, real-time engine, super powerful. Obviously, it's not Cycles, which is another render engine that comes with Blender. It's, you know, Cycles, super powerful. It's GPU supported, it's precise, it's perfect, but it is a bit heavy. I'm using a laptop here, and it takes much longer to render something simple like a logo transition or something like that. So Eevee just makes more sense. I mean, it's not as good as Cycles, but it gets you pretty close. Obviously, you know, it's a gaming engine, but to be honest with you, at Fox Sports, we use gaming engine to create things. For example, I don't know if you've heard of VizRT. That's essentially a gaming type environment. They take C4D files and convert them into VizRT environment, which is a gaming engine. So that way you can render things out that are 3D much quicker in a truck somewhere. So it's not a new thing for motion graphics. So for broadcast, gaming engine is not a new thing. So we're going to use Eevee, and make sure you go to this render settings here and make sure your render engine is set to Eevee, which by default it should be, but just to make sure. Another thing you want to do before you move forward, this color management, I'm actually going to go with, instead of Filmic, I'm going to go with Standard. And I have nothing against Filmic, it's just Standard kind of, I don't know, it gives me better look that I want. It kind of pops everything for me, so it's more contrasty. That's what I want. All right, so after this, here's what we're going to do. Now, Blender has different layouts. For example, we have a layout for like animation, this tab right here. When you click on it, you have a whole different layout with different panels that are designed for animation, which is good. Now we have the same thing for shading. When you go in here, you can see we have everything we need for shading, and that's where I want to go. We're going to do texturing, shading environment, or shading layout makes sense. But right away, you can see that it looks different. Like in here, we had a different look, right? Well, now shading has a different environment. Now this is not the final environment. It's a, what I call like a reference environment. Before we had this one right here. And, you know, in here you still were able to adjust like different lighting. You know, you can change different mocap. If you're doing sculpting, that makes sense, right? Well, that one right here, the next one over, is what I call, I'm not sure what it's called, but it's a like a reference environment, which is something you can, you know, bring your objects in, kind of see what they would look like in different environments, in different HDRI environments. So you can go in here while you're there, right? And then you can adjust or pick different HDRIs. You can say, hey, let's see what it looks like in the studio environment. And there's the HDRI. You can rotate it in here, do all kinds of stuff. You can pick like outside environments, or, you know, even something like indoors. So I think it's a great tool to kind of quickly see what things would look like in certain light scenes. But I'm going to go with this studio for right now. All right, so after this, we're going to select this outer ring. We're going to create our first texture. And usually you would go here to adjust your textures. You know, while you have your object selected, you would go there, adjust it, but I don't like using that. I like using nodes. It just makes more sense. So for this, we have this panel in here, which is called Shader Editor. That's where we're at. And in here we have a checkbox, which is not checked yet. It's called Use Nodes. If you check it while you have your object selected, you can see that now we have the same kind of stuff, but in here it's just node-based, which is something that visually more appealing for me. I love working that way. So I'm going to work in a nodes type environment. That's what I prefer. So right now we have our first texture. You can see we only have 2. So this one is going to be chrome. So I'm going to change it to chrome. That's the name of it. And this material is going to be chrome. So we're going to go heavy on metallic. We're going to go all the way to the top, to the right here. So it's set at 1. As you can see, it does give us that metallic look. And I want it to be pretty sharp. Like that, like almost like a mirror. I know it doesn't make sense right now, but it will make sense later. So that's good. You know, you can adjust the hotness of it, you know, this base color, maybe not so bright on the hot spots. And the darks, you know, my environment is going to be pretty white. So I'm going to brighten it up. I'm going to cheat a little bit, use emission to kind of just brighten it up. You do have to cheat with Eevee here and there, but it's okay. It's allowed, I think. So now we have chrome for this. Next, let's go to this inner circle. And I'm going to select, so right now it's set to chrome, but I'm going to select a different material. We have another one, and we're going to change this material to orange. All right, so we have this orange material. Obviously, it's not orange yet. So this is our shader here. Let's change the base color to something like orange, but I actually have a hex value that I copied. So I'm going to paste it in here. So now we have the proper ukramedia orange. So we have that in there. And the only thing I'm going to adjust is the roughness. So I can make it really sharp or blurry, but reflection is going to be pretty sharp. All right, so it's not looking good, I know. And the last one, so the edge for the it's actually supposed to be chrome, so I'm going to leave it as is. Chrome is good. Now the inner part of it, this I want it to be a different color. I want it to be white. So we don't have any more shaders here or materials. We're going to create a new material by clicking on this icon here. So we have a new material. I'm going to change it to white. All right, so we have a new material. Obviously, it's a metallic, so I'm going to take it all the way down to 0. Roughness, I'm going to keep it at 0 too, because I want to see that reflection. We're going to have that light reflecting. And let's see. Yeah, I'm going to keep it as this right now. So this is good for right now. We're going to alter it a bit later, but for right now, it's doing what it's supposed to do. So we have it all rigged up, but let's see what it looks like in the final render. So if we switch over to the final render, it's not looking too good. And primarily because our environment is just a solid color and we need to change that. So to change the environment, in other words, instead of having a solid color, we can bring in some kind of HDRI and use it instead. So how do we do that in Blender? It's pretty easy. It's the same panel that you go to for shading. You just, instead of object right here, just switch over to world. And now we are in the world environment. We have this background color. If you click on it, you know, you can adjust the colors. All of that you can do in here, but I'm not interested in the solid color. I want to bring in an HDRI. So let's bring in a new texture. You can either go to add or Shift A, and then you can go to texture. We're going to use a texture called environment. Environment is what you need for HDRI. So we're going to link it up to color, and right away you can see it's pink. That means, you know, we don't have anything loaded yet. So click on open and find an HDRI. I do have these two. So this one is blurred and it's not as bright. So I'm going to select that one, press OK. And by the way, that HDRI was created by a friend of mine, former coworker from Fox Sports, Chris Watson. You should check out his work, chwatson.com. The link to it is at the bottom of this video. Super talented guy. I mean, he's good. Anyway, so we have this environment in our scene, but it's not, you know, you can see that our Chrome is looking much better, but it's still not what I want. It's not as hot. I want it to be a bit more bright. So we're going to crank up the strength to something like 2. That's much better. So it's getting better. We're still not there yet. Now, the only thing is I don't want to see this HDRI in the background. Like if you would render it right now, you would see it, but I don't want to see it in my final render. So to get rid of it, you go to render options here and all the way down to film where it says transparent. Just make sure you check it. And now you can see it went away. We have transparent background. So it's working. All right, so we have that. We do have a lamp in the background. So right there, I'm gonna select it, hit X on my keyboard, delete it. I don't need it right now. So let's bring in another light. I'm just gonna use one light. It's a very simple setup here. And the light that I'm gonna bring in is gonna be an area light. And by the way, my cursor, 3D cursor, I remember it this time, is in the center. So I want it to be there. So when I bring in a new light, it's gonna drop it wherever my 3D cursor is. So I can either go to add here or press Shift A. And then we're going to go down to light, and area light is what I'm interested in. As you can see, it drops it right there. You can do Shift space and select move, or press T and select it from here. However you get there, it's totally fine. So now we have an area light, and we can go to this light tab. We can adjust some settings. So the shape of it is kind of a square, which is if that's what you're going for, it's good. But I want something different. I want either a circle or an ellipse. Yeah, because ellipse allows us to go on X and Y. We can kind of alter this, but I'm going to go 22 on the X and 8 on the Y. Okay, so that's good. We can move it up. It's pretty, it's not as effective. As we made it bigger, it's not as strong. So we got to crank this up to something like 1000. Yeah, now you can see it. I mean, the cool thing about lights, you saw before, it was pretty boring, but lights, put it on top, it gives you a nice little gradient, it gives you something hot at the top, and then, it gets darker at the bottom. So it definitely gives you an interesting look. So lights can make a big difference if you know how to do it right. So then I'm going to move it to maybe like to the right some, like 2, on the Y, let's move it maybe like -1.3 or something like that. Right there is good. And let's go up to 3. So it's looking better, but still I want for this shape of my light to be reflecting right here like that. So as you can see, that's not happening. So I can select the light while I have it selected. I can go to X rotation and I can move it. See, I can move it right here. There it goes. Now I can start seeing reflection. So I'm going to set it to 50. That looks like that's the area where I want to be. So it's working. But again, it's kind of washed out. It's not exactly what I want. And by the way, before we go any further, let me take this light and I'm gonna parent it to the controls. When I move the logo, I want the light to stay with it. So again, remember how that works. So select the controls first, and then, well, wait a minute, no. Area light first, and then controls second. So shift select both of them, and then press Control P. So whatever you select last is gonna be the parent, okay? And then say Object. And now it's there, but we need to also move it into that collection like that. So there it is. So it's working. So now when I move the controls, the empty or whatever, then the light's going to move with it. All right. So let's work with this. Let's fix this. I don't know. It just looks pretty boring. It doesn't have any contrast. To do that, we're going to go to this render settings in here, and we're going to turn on ambient occlusion. When you do that, you'll start seeing some shadows. There you go. It darkens it, so it pops it a bit more. So we need some contrast. Then we're going to play with, reflection right now. If you look at it, it's kind of boring. It just gives us this solid color, which in reality, we should be seeing like orange in here, and we're not. So check this one right here, screen space reflections. As you can see, it changes it. So it's looking much better. All right. What else can we do here? So shadows. Right here, I want to change to soft shadows. So now it changed. You can see it's pretty soft. It's looking much better, but it still doesn't pop. I want that to pop from the shape. And to do that, we need to go to, let's go to the light. So let's select the light, that light right here. And inside there, let's go to the settings in here where it says shadows. Even though it's on, we want to check this contact shadows. So now it pops it really well. So you can see now we're getting exactly what we want. But we can also, select these materials, and we can go to Object again, and we can alter like the white, for example. You can maybe, let's click on it again. There you go. You can tone it down some so you can see reflection more. You can play with this. Obviously you don't want it to be too white because then you don't see reflection. I'm talking about this reflection on the white. So maybe toning it down some, but I still want it to be a little hot. And the same thing for chrome. You can select the chrome and maybe alter the white in here as well. So you can obviously tone it down some to where it just brings back detail. Anyway, something like this is actually pretty good. And if you, let's see what else we can do here. So if you move around, I mean, it's given us exactly what I need for this. So we're pretty much there. Let's see what else we might have missed here. So we do have bloom. That's an interesting feature here. So for example, if you check that, it kind of gives you a highlight, which can be interesting. Like Chrome kind of emits light a bit. So maybe we can select that one and change it to something like blue. I don't know, might give us something interesting. Just a minor detail, crank it up just a little bit. It is time to do some animation. And for that, we're gonna go into a different layout that's called animation. Here it is. If you click on this tab, as you can see, they give us all the right tools we need to do some animation. And on the left, we see a panel that basically gives us what this camera is seeing. So that's important. I'm gonna press Z while I'm hovering over this. And then let's see the rendered look, okay? And here's what we're gonna do. So I'm gonna press T to view my tools. We're gonna move on this camera. We're gonna be animating this camera, but before we do that, let's do some adjusting. So we're gonna go to this timeline right here. And at the bottom right corner, you see this start and end. So start, looks like it starts at frame number 1, but I'm gonna go to 0. I wanna start at frame number 0, and then it's gonna be a 60-second animation. So it's gonna be a quick wipe. So let's do 60. So it's gonna go between 0 and 60. There it is. Let's kind of adjust this, all right, like that. And you can also go to output panel right here, and you can do the same thing in there. So like start 0 and 60, and then frame rate, let's set that to 29.97. So that's all the changes I'm gonna do. That's good. So now let's do some animation. So halfway through my animation at 30 frames, I want to see what I'm seeing right now. So it's gonna be, that's the final, right, the position of my logo and everything. So what I need to do, while my camera is selected, let's go to this objects, the object settings. And in here, let's set a keyframe for Y. So we're gonna be animating this Y property. So we're gonna set a keyframe just like it is in After Effects. Click on it and we have a keyframe. We see them in here. That's good. Then I'm gonna go to the frame 0. So starting out, I want for this camera to go all the way to it like this, maybe like right about here. Something like that. That's good. I'm gonna set a keyframe and I'm gonna hover my mouse over it and Control-C and copy this value. Okay, so it's starting out like this, and then I wanna go back into it at frame 60. So I'm gonna hover over it, Control-V and paste. So, and make sure you set a keyframe. There you go. So now, if I preview this, you can see it kind of zooms out and goes back in. I mean, we're kind of there, but I wanna adjust my curves and the handles to kind of make it more dynamic. And to do that, we're gonna go here, click here, and let's go to animation and make sure you go to graph editor. So this is where you'll see your curves. And while you have all your points selected, press period on your numpad and it will show you all your points in here. And then you can, adjust it, do whatever you want with it. So for this one right here, I wanna extend it some. So I'm gonna select this, press S for scale, and let's stretch it out like that. So you can see it's gonna kind of come in quicker and then it's gonna stay there longer. So if I preview this, let's go to the beginning here. If I press space to preview, you can see it kind of like snaps and then it stays there. That's exactly what I want. So that's good. I'm gonna keep it as is, not much work here. So now we wanna work on the logo itself. So I'm gonna select the nulls. Remember, we're not gonna animate the shape or the logo itself. We're gonna animate the control, right? This controls null, or whatever that you want to call it, right? In After Effects, we call it nulls, but in here it's empty. So what we're going to do, we're going to animate the Z-axis, right? The rotation like that. That's what we're going to be animating. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to go to the beginning here, and well, let's start at the beginning, at the center. So at the center, I want it to look how it is now. So for the Z, while I have that nulls or empty selected, I'm going to set a keyframe at 0. So that's where I want it to be, right? And then I'm going to go to the beginning here. There, I want it to be 180. So I want it to be rotated 180. Right, then I'm going to set a keyframe. So it's going to kind of flip and then be fully revealed at 30. And then at 60, I want it to be, kind of go full circle. I want it to be negative 180. And then set a keyframe. Okay, so something like this, right? It kind of flips. Obviously, it's not there yet. We need to adjust the curve. So I'm going to press A and select all my points and then period to reveal them in my graph here. So there they are. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to select this middle one, press R for rotation, and I can kind of rotate it, kind of slow it down in the middle, right? And then I can do press S and scale it all the way to like this. So now if I preview this, you can see it's looking much better. It kind of snaps. Actually, I'm going to keep it like this. You can adjust, rotation if you want to have more movement or however you want to do, but that's working for me. It's doing exactly what I wanted to do. All right, so now that we are done with modeling, texturing, lighting, and animation, the next step would be compositing. And what that means is this. You want to take the logo and then put something behind it and maybe add like a vignette and a few other things. So how would you do that in Blender? When I work with Cinema 4D, usually I just export each pass, reflection, all that stuff, and then I bring it into After Effects and then I composite everything there. However, with Blender, you don't have to leave Blender to do any kind of compositing. You can do compositing in Blender. Let me show you how. So we can go to this compositing layout by clicking on this tab here. Now we are in a compositing world, and we do use this compositor right here. So that's what we have. It is a node-based compositing, which is amazing. But if you want to use node-based compositing, you want to make sure that's checked right here. So now we have our nodes. That's our scene. We're kind of exporting our image into composite. But watch what happens when I hit render. So if I go to render here, and if I click on this render image or F12 on your keyboard, it basically renders, the frame and it gives us a new window. That's good, but I don't want to do that. For each time that it does that, like if I go to render, I don't want to open up a new window each time I render. I want to change it to keep user interface. So when you have that checked, and when you bring in a node called viewer, I'm going to shift A or go to add, whichever one you want to go with. I'm going to use a keyboard shortcut, shift A, and then go to output viewer. So this node has to do with this. When you link up your scene to this viewer image, you'll see whatever you rendered in here, which is awesome, right? And you can also adjust the settings. So right now it's kind of zoomed in. So I can go over here to the right to the view, and I can say fit. So now it fits the whole thing to my composition or whatever you call this in Blender. So I can select this viewer node and watch this. I can adjust the size. I can move it around, which is great, but I'm going to tell it to fit. So it's pretty awesome, right? So it shows you what you just rendered in here. So next time, let's say if I go to frame 46 and if I press F12 to render the frame, watch this. Instead of opening up a new window, it just renders it in here. So I like it much better that way. So now what I'm going to do, we're going to do some compositing. So we have our logo here. What I want to do, I want to put some kind of image behind it. So I don't want to just our logo. I want to have a background image. So let's bring in a video, like an animated video background. So I'm going to do Shift A to bring in new stuff. So inputs, and then we're going to go to movie clip. Okay. As you can see, we have a movie clip node. We're going to load up a movie clip. So I'm going to go to video, and I have this background that if you've seen my tutorials, you've seen me use this background multiple times. It's an animated background that I created in Blender. So if I connect it to the viewer, you can see that that's the background, right? It animates to the right, which is good. So it has some kind of movement. It's going to have some secondary animation, which is great. But I want to put this logo on top of this video. How would I do that in Blender? Well, to do that, we're going to use a node called alpha over. So I'm going to press Shift A and go to color, and alpha over is right here. So I'm going to link it up, put this image right underneath there. And as you can see, both of them are married together. So now if I go to frame, let's say 40, F12, you can see right now it's rendering. So everything's working. They're both connected together. So that's how we composite things together. Next, let me show you how to create a vignette. Here's what we need to do to create a vignette in our compositor here. We're going to use a node that's called ellipse mask. So for that, you can either go to add or Shift A, my favorite shortcut. And we're going to go to matte. And right down there, you see ellipse mask. So we have this thing right here. If I link it up to my viewer right here, notice we see like an ellipse here. So we can adjust the size of it. We can say something like 0.960, and let's go something like maybe 0.600. So we have, kind of looks like a vignette, but obviously it's pretty sharp. So we need to feather these. And to do that, we're going to use a node called blur. So Shift A, let's search for blur. All right, there it is. Link it up. Let's do fast one. Okay, and in here, I'm just going to say something like 500 on the X. You can see it's going to blur on the X, and 500 on the Y. So now it looks like a vignette. I mean, it's looking legit. And what we need to do, we need to put that on top of our logo and the background image. So we need to marry these two together. And to do that, we're going to use a node called Mix. So Shift A, let's search for a node called Mix. There it is. We're going to link it up. So both of these, there you go. So we see vignette first, right? But the problem is that's all we see is vignette. But we want to use multiply. In After Effects, you know, it's a blending mode, multiply. Well, the same here. Instead of mix, just go to multiply. And now it multiplies right on top of our image in here, right? This is our final combined image. So we're taking our vignettes and we're combining them together using a mix node, and we're telling it to multiply. So obviously it's a little too strong. So I want half of that. I'm going to say 0.5. So now it gives me half of that, which is exactly what I want. So if you want to see before and after, watch this. So that's before and that's after. So that's how you create a vignette. The awesome thing about compositing is that it allows you to add imperfections to your renders. And what I mean by that is this. I mean, let's face it, when we render stuff out of any 3D application, a lot of times it looks too fake. It looks too perfect. So you want to go back in compositing and maybe add some imperfections like a vignette or some dust elements and maybe like lens smudges, something to make it look more real. And what I like to do, I'm not going to add any smudges or dust elements, but what I'm going to do for this, you know, I'm going to flood in some colors because if you take a picture outside, you don't get just a white light. I mean, you get blue light coming in from the right side and maybe like a warm red color. Maybe that's a light bouncing off a red car. And it just kind of, you know, it's not always just one light, one color. There are a lot of colors. And that's what I want to recreate here. So if you go to like frame number 48, and if you render this, notice it looks too fake. So watch this. You can see it looks too black, too white. I mean, it just doesn't look believable. It doesn't look like they belong together, basically. And when you flood in the colors, it kind of connect like the two composites better together. I don't know if that makes sense, but let me show you what I'm talking about. Let me extend this some to kind of buy us some space. So something like this. Let me fit that in. Let's move this up. So I'm going to reuse this ellipse mask. So select this, Shift D to duplicate it, and I'm going to link it up to the viewer. So we have the same vignette type mask, ellipse mask. So I'm going to adjust the size of it. On the X, let's do 350. On the Y, let's do 0.250. So we have something like this. Let's put it at the top right corner. So let's do like 0.8 on the X, and let's do 0.8 on the Y. So it's right there. Let's blurry this. I'm going to select this, Shift D, and duplicate the blur node. And I'm going to crank it up on the X. Let's keep it like at 1000. And make sure that's 1000. Is it? 1, 2, 3. There you go. And then for the X, let's do 800. Okay, so you can see that it kind of behaves like a light coming in from the top right corner, which is good. So I want that light to be a different color. So I'm going to use a mix node. I'm going to select this, Shift D to duplicate it. And I'm going to attach it to this and make this black. And by the way, instead of multiply, let's use add. I want to combine them together. So obviously now we have a color, so I can change it to something like maybe blue, like this. So now we have a blue kind of gradient coming in from the top right corner, which is good. I'm going to link this, kind of connect them together here so they're kind of together. So let's push this up, select all three of them, Shift D and duplicate them together. So now I'm going to link that one up, and let's change the color of it to something warm, something maybe like red, maybe like this. That's good. Now I don't want it to be at the same place. I want to move it down to maybe like right over here. So let's do something like, let's see, let's go here, 0.2 and maybe 0.3. So now it's at the bottom. Okay. Now we have two separate ones, right? We have a blue light and a red light. I want to marry them together. So I'm going to duplicate this mix, Shift D to, select it, Shift D, and we're going to link this one and that one together. And instead of, well, add is actually what we want. So you can see we have both of them combined. So it's adding both colors together, which is great. But now I want to take this color and the final render that we get here, I want to marry them together. And again, we're going to use a mix shader, Shift D, duplicate it. So we have the same thing, link them up together, and it's adding together. You can see we can go all the way to 0 and we'll see vignette. We can go all the way to the right. We'll see this, but I'm going to change them up like this. Let's see. Yeah, there you go. So now when I go all the way to the right, you can see we're seeing some light coming in. The blue light, it's kind of flooding, and then we have some warm light flooding. So it looks much better. However, it's too much. So we want to cut it down maybe half. I'm going to say 0.5. So you want like a subtle, you don't want to overdo it. So if I do before and after, watch this. So this is before, like this, and then after. All right, well, we are almost done. There's one last thing we need to do, and it has to do with the alpha channel of our animation. Let me show you what I'm talking about. So right now, if I go to like frame 7, if I hit F12, and if I preview our current frame, watch what happens. So we get this frame right here. This is our logo. This is the back of our logo. And notice the back of it is solid. It's not transparent. And that's a problem because it's a wipe, right? It's coming from transparency into this new world, logo world, and then it goes back to transparency so that we can cut between two different clips. Well, we're not seeing that because we don't have alpha channels set up. And you know, if you work with cycles, you have a lot more options with like object ID and all kinds of stuff. Well, Eevee doesn't really have that. At least I'm not seeing it. So I'm going to fake it. And if you have a better solution, I'm all ears. But this is what I did. So right now we have this scene that we created. This whole thing is just a scene. You have it in here. I'm going to label it main. So all the lights, objects, everything is scene called main. That's what it is. And you can think of it like a composition in After Effects. So it's like a composition. What I can do is duplicate this scene. I can go over here and say, make a copy, a full copy, meaning when I click here, it creates a new scene that's identical to the first one. Animation, everything is the same. But the cool thing about that is that I can do changes to it and it's not going to affect the first one, right? So I'm going to go here and label this one alpha channel. And essentially, I'm going to create a Luma matte. Now, some of you are probably catching on what I'm doing. Again, it's not perfect, but it works. So I'm going to go to shading and let's see the final shading here. So let's deal with the object. So for example, I'm going to make everything white except the back. The back of it is going to be black because we're creating a Luma matte. So wherever there's black, that's what's going to be transparent in the final animation. So in here, I'm going to select this object, this UM, and I'm going to create a new material. I'm going to call it, let's call it white. It's going to be Luma. Okay. I'm going to make it black here. Let's see, specular, let's take it down. Let's make it white. I guess it doesn't matter. So now we have white. All it is white. We can go to the Chrome and do the same thing. We can just say white Luma. Again, everything's white. The same thing for the circle. We can assign it to white Luma. And the edge. So let's do the same thing here, white Luma. All right, so it's looking good. Now the back of it, I want it to be black. So let's create a new material. We'll call it black Luma. Okay, and we'll take it black for the base color. I guess all of that doesn't matter. Metallic doesn't matter. So let's go to emission and make sure it's fully black. Okay, so now we have white and black. That's good. We do need to adjust some settings in render here. So let's do this. Get rid of ambient occlusion, bloom. We don't need it. Screen. What else? Shadow. I guess we don't need soft shadow. Transparency. We actually don't need that right now. So I'm going to get rid of it. Obviously, we're seeing HDRI. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go to world and right here, I'm going to select it, get rid of this HDRI. And instead of that color, I'm going to take it to white. So essentially, I created a Luma matte. And if I go back to layout here, if I hit Z and see it rendered, if I scroll through here, you can see wherever there's black in this area, it's going to be transparent. So then it's going to basically disappear. And wherever there's white, we'll see the animation. So let me show you how to link that. So let's go to the main scene. So we are in the main scene now. You can see Everything's looking okay in this one. Nothing was changed, which is great. Let's go to compositing. And in here, here's what we need to do. So I'm going to select the scene. And while it is selected, I'm going to press Shift D to duplicate it. So we're going to put it right here. And this one is main, but for that one, I'm going to tell it to be the alpha channel. So basically the Luma mat we just created. So composite is our final render here. And this is for preview. So what I want to do, let me put them out here kind of. So obviously I want to link both, the final result to composite and the viewer so I can see it. And also when I hit render, it's going to give me the final image. However, if I go, let's say frame 7, and if I hit F12, watch what happens. So it's going to render it. We'll still see the back. We're seeing it. But now I can take the image that we created in the Luma mats, basically in another scene, and plug it into the alpha right here, to this alpha of the composite and also alpha of our viewer. So when we do that, you can see right away the back is gone. It's transparent. So if we go to frame 4 and if we hit F12 to render the image, watch what happens. Wait for it. Sure enough, it is transparent. Now the same case is for the back here as well. So if I hit F12, it'll be transparent as well because again, we created a Luma mat. Again, it's not perfect, but it worked. As you can see, it is transparent. So that is how you successfully create a logo wipe in Blender. Now that we are done with everything, the only thing we have to do is render it out. And it's pretty easy. All you got to do, just go to this output tab. And in here you have output. And just tell it where you want to go. In my case, I'm going to go to this tutorial render. I already have it rendered, but you would just say accept. And then in here, you would select your file format. Now I went with OpenEXR. So that's what I went with. And make sure you have RGBA plus alpha selected. So that's important. Make sure you have that selected. So if you're not seeing alpha, it's because you don't have that one selected. And after this, you're ready to go. So you can just go to render and then press render animation or Control F12. So hit that and then it's going to start rendering. Let me show you what that looks like in After Effects. We are in After Effects, and to import your image sequence, all you got to do, just go to Project Panel, double click here, and then navigate to the folder that you rendered everything out to. And you just need to select one image. I'm going to select one of them. Make sure OpenEXR sequence is checked. You want to make sure that's checked and then press import. And after that, you'll see it in your project panel. Double click, you'll see it in here and you can preview it. As you can see, we see transparency, then we see all the reflections. Everything's looking great. The background is actually animating. So we do see some movements and then it goes back to transparency. So as you can see, it's looking pretty good. All right, well, this is the end of this Blender tutorial. I hope you enjoyed it. I had a blast recording it. I love Blender 2.8. It's amazing. It's going to be out soon. But again, if you want to download the beta, the link to it is at the bottom of this video. And also, if you want to see the project file from this tutorial, you can download that as well. The link to it is at the bottom of this video as well. And if you love this video, make sure you like it because, it kind of tells me that you want to see more Blender tutorials. And also, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on social media. We do have an amazing community. It's a mentoring group on Facebook, so you can join that as well. ukramedia.com/community. The link to it is at the bottom of this video. But in the meantime, I want to thank you for watching. My name is Sergey Praknevsky, and this is ukramedia.com.